Thank you very much. Well, from the sublime to procurement. Unfortunately, somebody has to talk about it, so it's left to me. We are, I suppose, representative, just for people who may not be aware of who the GCCC are. We are a committee made up of the, I suppose, the main clients, public clients across the public sector. We meet on a regular basis. We formulate policy, which is, I suppose, brought through from government, obviously, and we enable that through, I suppose, a mechanism that's known as the Capital Works Management Framework. It contains the public works contracts, much loved of all people in the room, the conditions of engagement and so on and so forth that are we use, if you like, in terms of forming contracts with private sector suppliers, service providers and contractors. Then, in a way, I imagine we would have given our right arm for BIM to have been up and running at the time those contracts were introduced. 2007, because they're a lump sum fixed price contract, I suppose heavily dependent on a comprehensively designed project going out to market. I suppose if those of you who are familiar with the review that has been undertaken and the changes that we're implementing, they're not significant changes, but they are significant in what we believe will make the contracts and the engagement with industry work that bit better. And it is about getting information and bringing information up to a certain standard and a certain level, which is why we're bringing our friends, the quantity surveyor, I suppose, back into the fold to a much greater degree. Obviously, BIM has a place to play in that as well. We have not, I suppose, leapt into the same space as the British government in mandating the use of BIM. We have been quite slow and, I suppose, reticent in some senses to go that route because of the, well, frankly, the annihilation that the industry suffered from 2007 to 2008 onwards. It's only now, I think, I hear people outside in the room and various other events we attend, people are starting to talk about recovery, people are busy. So that's terribly positive, and I'm heartened to see in the short period that I've been here, a number of public sector clients, if you like, who have, I suppose, heavily embraced BIM. The Children's Hospital is obviously an excellent example, Grangecorman Development Agency, but so too the Office of Public Works and the Department of Education generally. The Department of Education have a huge volume of work to get through, so obviously when you're trying to get that volume through, you're focusing on, you know, the here and now, I suppose, but significant steps have been taken there to work into that space. So from the point of view of government policy, BIM is absolutely bang on, I suppose, the tool that we need to deliver. That it's part of the whole process that we look for. Government policy on the awarding of public works contracts demands cost certainty, and that again goes back to certainty in the design, certainty in what the contractor is taking on. From the pure procurement side of things, there are undoubtedly challenges, and again, we would like to, I would dearly like to have the time to get into, I suppose, a discussion as to how we, who are, I suppose, prevented in a, say, a traditional employer-designed contract from specifying or naming products, and how that challenge is overcome in terms of the level of detail that you can take models to. We're certainly looking at BIM models as a means of, you know, using them, say, from an employer design contract in the procurement process itself to get more certainty from everybody as to what it is we're getting for the contract sum. But we're a little way off that. But certainly we see tremendous advantages, obviously, from the information certainty from the outset, but also in the tendering stage. And as was said earlier on, clients, we have a wide and disparate client group in the public sector. Obviously, you go from the very large and I would say process-driven in some senses in places like a HSE to the devolved structures that exist in education. So, we have to be mindful of that, and we were just talking about it earlier on, that in many cases a BIM model that's generated an enormous expense and effort through everyone in delivering the project may end up being handed to somebody who's essentially a caretaker for a facility. And we have to look at that, because we have to see, well, how do we get the maximum benefit out of the data? And I think you talked about it as well, Gers, what do we do with this model now? And so that's a message that we have to get across to our colleagues in the public service as to, what is this thing that they've been given at the end of the day? I mean, it's not a health and safety plan, it's much, much more than that. So as we start to develop, new procurement directives are coming in. They'll certainly be in no later than April here and through the transposition process. But in those are enshrined certain things that I think even we would struggle with generally, such as life cycle costing and so on. And so BIM obviously offers opportunities in terms of assessing that and evaluating it. So those are the sorts of things, I suppose, these are the challenges that we're going to be faced with over the next couple of years. And I think certainly BIM and the way that the processes are integrated and managed in the models offer us tremendous opportunities from the procurement side. In terms of contract modifications, I suppose, we don't see a huge need for change in the contracts to facilitate BIM. Obviously, it depends on where you're going. If you're looking at full contractor involvement in the model, then we have to look at that from where the procurement position sits. We are shortly going to be publishing the amended forms. As I say, they're not heavy amendments, they're reasonably straightforward, but one of the steps which we think will go a long way to facilitate the, if you like, the design information part, and certainly as formerly a project architect in my previous employment, the challenges that an architect faces no more than an M&E engineer in terms of, in public procurement, how to accurately define what it is we're going to end up with, when clearly the contractor is the deciding factor quite often in the products and materials that are used in the building. So, we have to look at how we can balance that, and we've introduced we have always had an option for direct tendering to specialists, which is obviously where that significant design element arrives in an employer design contract. But we've amended that now. It was a process known as novation. We're looking at I suppose it's a similar process to nomination, if any of you are familiar with the RII forms of contracts. It's not the same, but it is similar. And so we believe that will allow us to, I suppose, get the benefit of that design input where, quite frankly, it's not possible to define whatever it might be, if it's a curtain walling system or a heating and ventilation system, to that level of degree for the procurement purposes. So those are areas that we think the amendments will assist greatly in terms of both procurement and getting that I suppose that finer level of detail into the process, which obviously then assists the main contractor in pricing the overall works element or their element of the works. So I'd just like to thank you anyway for having us here today. We're watching the space, and as you can see already, quite a number of the public sector bodies have embraced it and will continue to do so, because I think the experience has been nothing really but positive to date. So thank you very much.